So thank you all for sticking around for this discussion, and I guess we'll start out by, rather than me introducing you, why don't we start out by having each of you introduce yourselves to the audience and tell them who you are and where you have come to Sarasota from, and what makes you an expert. No, I'm just kidding. Tell them what your connection is and how you came to be on the panel.
Hi, my name is Clay Hassler, and I'm the writer-director of the feature film screening here at Sarasota called Homeless, and I'm coming from Nashville, Tennessee.
Hi, I'm Tiff Hassler. I'm Clay's wife, and I'm the producer for Homeless, and also coming from Nashville.
Two proud alums of Florida State University, right?
Yes.
Yep. Go throw that in. Any Seminoles out there? Go ahead.
Hi, Does this work? Yeah. Hi, I'm Thomas Wertenson. I'm the director of the film Homeless, which is screening today at 5:30. And I'm originally from Austria, but I live in New York.
And hello, I'm Mark Ray from New York City, and I'm the subject of Tom's documentary. He and I collaborated on this effort for a few years, and it's nice to be in Sarasota.
Tom Barwin, your city manager for the last 2.5 years. Before here, I was in the Chicago suburb of Oak Park, Illinois, and before that, Metro Detroit.
Thanks so much for being here, Tom, and thank you all for being here. As you, those of you who were here opening night last night know, sort of the one way to tell the story of how our social issue focus on homelessness this year came about is with a conversation that Mark and Tom had about the idea of bringing to light films about homelessness. So I guess I'll start out by saying just a word or two about the shorts program. I think that so my wife works in homeless issues as well. She's not here today, or not here in the theater today, but I have learned so much from her and from watching her do her work. And one of the things I think that is really important to understand about homelessness is that, from my perspective and my experience, it's not an isolated problem. It's something that's connected to a lot of other things, and it's kind of a Jenga puzzle where, doing this doesn't just affect this, it affects this and this and this and this. And so I thought it was especially appropriate to have this set of shorts that not everyone dealt specifically with homelessness, but things like poverty and inequity and psychological despair, emotional despair, and things like this are all part of this interlocking puzzle of this problem that people find themselves in. And so I guess the first question I want to ask the panel is just to sort of react to that a little bit and tell me about the perceived simplicity of the issue as opposed to your experience with the complexity of the situation, if that question makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why we actually titled our film Homeless, is so that when you actually do come to the screening, you're approaching it as a stereotype, but we're also asking you as you watch the film to sort of unload that baggage that you have, any preconceived notions about homelessness, as you watch this particular individual's life unfold. It is very complex. Generational poverty plays a huge role. One of the things that our film deals with very closely, thematically, is the cyclicalness of homelessness. And our subject, it is a scripted film, but in real life our subject's father was in prison for many years, and also when you get out of prison it's really hard to find a job, and so he was homeless, and so we saw that recurring pattern happening in his son's life and how difficult that is, and especially having lack of education, especially is emblematic of a lack of opportunities. So.
Yeah, and I would just say, I think what you mentioned is very true. There are so many different reasons and obstacles that have put people in a place of couch surfing, homelessness, living in poverty, whatever it might be. And I think that what Clay and I have talked a lot about is that I don't think any one individual can fix homelessness with like a capital H, but I think that communities can join together and can make a difference, and that it takes everybody, jumping in and being a part of the conversation, being a part of implementing change, and I think that's all.
Well, my film is maybe a little bit about some a homelessness that is new, I think, and that it's happening for the last few years. It's a New York story, and New York has 60,000 homeless people, and 25,000 of them are children, and a lot of them even, they have a job, a full-time job, and have to live in a shelter, which is outrageous, I think. And there are people going on the streets now next week about this, and I think we are all connected somehow, and we are connected through social media, but we are at the same time also very detached. So to make that bridge, to have this empathy with people who are in trouble, who get in this situation where they lose their homes. And I'm from Europe, so Europe, I think countries in Europe, they still have like a safety net that is a little stronger than in the United States. Here it can happen really fast, and that you lose your job. And I have friends coming up to me and say, your protagonist, this could be me. I lose my job, and within a few months, I'm on the street, or I wouldn't know what to do. So it's a big problem in the States right now, I think.
Mark Ray here, and Tom and I did this film about my life and existence the last few years in New York City. I don't consider myself homeless. I just consider myself a guy that doesn't have a home. And in my case, it was more a choice. I just wanted to have a simpler life. I didn't want to fall into the trap of the rat race again, and trying to come up with about $1,000 a month to have a shared place in Manhattan. So it's maybe an interesting perspective from my point of view, because I was more or less willing to have that situation, and I found it a challenge, and I found it rewarding to kind of fly under the radar and buck the system. But there were times when I could connect with people who were in a dire situation, and it was funny in a way to be, in this disguise of an upper middle class man, but living very much similar to the people that you normally see pushing a shopping cart or sleeping outdoors, but no one really would ever expect that from me.
Tom?
Yes, first I'd like to thank the Sarasota Film Festival for having homelessness as a part of the theme of this year's film festival, and the shorts were terrific. As you know, the city, the community has been wrestling with the issue of chronic homelessness now for a good 30 years. I hope we're at a pivot point. We've had a lot of wonderful people step up and try to deal with it. We have a Salvation Army here. We have a Resurrection House, which is a day drop-in facility. We have a lot of church, faith-based organizations involved, a lot of volunteers, a lot of money is raised. But we still have this very stubborn challenge with chronically homeless, and there are about 300 to 400 living on the streets in and around the city downtown here. We're a small town, 55,000 full-time residents, although 4 million people come through the community every year. Over the course of the year, we're still a small town. So the chronic homeless challenge really, I think, stands out for most of our residents and our visitors. And I think the movies have helped, I think, those of us really trying to understand and figure out how to deal with the issue, learn more about it, and we're really evolving as a community, I think, now to realize that we've got to take each and every one of these individuals on a case-by-case basis, because there's so many unique stories, so many unique situations, and that's what we're trying to organize to do. But these educational efforts, these films, these conversations, really probably are the most important part of what we're going through, so we can get as many people in the community on the same page in terms of understanding the challenge.
Yeah. I love that last thing you said tied in a little bit with what you said about sympathy, I think, in that I said last night, at the opening night, I feel like, especially in a place like New York or like Sarasota, where this is such an issue that the whole city is grappling with, that, our brothers and sisters who are on hard times that are facing us on the street have almost become invisible. They're just part of the cityscape, and we hardly see them anymore. And as you point out, these are our brothers and sisters. These are individual human beings. It's a case-by-case thing. It's not an inanimate object, and it's not one class of people that are all facing the same thing. And I think that one of the strengths of film, one of the real powers of film, is that more than any other art form, I believe, it allows us as filmmakers to try to bring the audience into the experience of the characters. And since we have mostly filmmakers on the panel here, I wanted to ask you about that too, about how you approached the idea of your film as a way of bridging the gap of understanding.
Well, I think we're onto something very important where Tom said it, and also Michael, that this is the problem is about the individual, and these individuals have family or had family, friends, real relationships with people, and so that's what we wanted to do. When we met our character Josh, it was just one person. And there was something that was so attractive about him, the fact that he was just smiling through it all. And not in a superficial way. He was just a genuinely happy person. But he was 18 years old and living in a shelter with older men, and suddenly having to become part of this system that as a teenager, it's for me to think about me being in there at 18 is just, I can't imagine. I don't think I could deal with it. And so we wanted to start it from that point, just one individual, and looking into his life intimately, looking at his background and trying to explore that. And so, yeah, that was really important and significant through the process of writing the screenplay and talking with him about that and then making the film. And when we wrote the script, we didn't have a shelter lined up to film it. And we were 28 days from production, and so we were kind of freaking out. But we approached the shelter that our character actually stayed at and sat down with the director of the shelter and the assistant director. Didn't even show them the script. We brought one. They didn't want to see it. We said, this is about cyclical homelessness, chronic homelessness. And they said, we're in. And they let us film in the shelter with the residents there for a week. And we just had to sort of block and choreograph everything within the ongoings of the shelter while it was working at full capacity in the cold winter months. And for us, just being there in the after hours in the hospitality room where the men are playing chess, playing card games, watching the NBA together, sharing meals, praying together, that's for me where it really opened my eyes and thought, man, this is what community is supposed to be about. When you take the wealth, when you take just all these facades that we kind of, layer ourselves with, and you just see the human being and for what they really are. I mean, we met people with master's degrees in the shelter, a New York photographer, fashion photographer that landed on hard times and just happened to be in there as well. And like everyone is saying, these are people with real stories. And so, and that's where I think I've found the purest sense of the brotherhood of man, where you're just having real conversations with people and just talking about life in a very real way and going through life together, even if it's temporary in that short amount of time.
Yeah, I think with our film, we're telling one story, and it's one of many, many stories that are all different and have, moving parts. And I think that kind of what we're all kind of speaking of is the individual and learning the individual story and seeing how you can be a part of that, assist in that story. And so with our film, I think it shows you, from based on a true story, one boy's kind of trials through this change in his life where he ends up in the shelter and then how he works through that. And I think that's just to put a face on one story. And we certainly, and it's a story that's kind of different than like what, if you came last night, what you saw, because it's based in North Carolina. So it's a different it's a different type of homelessness. You're going to have the same, struggles regardless of where you're at, but a lot of things are going to be different because it's a smaller city. It's not, there's, 3 or 4 shelters in the town. There's not the system all over New York or whatever it might be. So it's just a different look at it, and it's a look into one story. And I think also what Clay was just talking about with the shelter is that when we started volunteering there and getting to know the residents, both while filmmaking and then also just being there, is that they all have their individual stories too, and each of them are different, and each of them have different needs. And so really understanding the individual and where they're at and why they're there, and then trying to be a part of that in whatever way that you can, or we as a community can. Thanks, Clay.
Well, Mark and I go back a long way, and we were both kind of in our, early 20s, pursuing our dreams or a good life, or what we thought would be a good life in the fashion world, right? We were both models, believe it or not, in the late 80s, 90s, and we met there.
Child models. We were very, very young.
We met there, and we kept in touch over the years and ran into each other in different places. And when I moved to New York 7 years ago, I called him up, and we were just, having a beer together and in a fancy bar. And then I asked him, "Where do you live?" And for some reason, he shared his story with me, and it just struck me like, this was so unbelievable. There is this guy, this good-looking guy, who seems to have everything that it takes to live the American dream, and he doesn't have a place to sleep. He sleeps outside, and I knew immediately that I wanted to tell this story. And then we went on this journey, and he showed me his individual, fate, and his story, and it really was shocking. But the thing is, that we always get used to things, right, very quickly. So as unusual and crazy it was in the beginning for me, now it almost becomes normal to me. And I think we do that with a lot of things in homelessness too. It's first, it's outrageous, that there are so many people who are homeless, and it should be. But at the same time, it becomes kind of, we push it out of our sight, and I think after the financial crisis 2008, there are a lot of people in the middle class drifted into homelessness, and it's a real tragedy, and that we can't afford the basis in life anymore. A home, that's the basis, and food.
Well,
I could go to the next one if you, unless you, do you have? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to ask one question before I throw it to the audience. I want to give you all plenty of time because we have to end exactly at 12:45. So I want to give you all time for questions. But I do want to ask one more question. None of us on stage, Tom accepted, are policymakers. None of us are social workers. None of us are, that I know of, are PhDs in studies of this problem. And so I don't necessarily want to ask from the panel about specific policies, governmental policies or social action, that kind of thing. If it's important for people to bring it up, you can bring it up in the Q&A. I do, however, want to ask, I feel like that the elephant in the room whenever this issue is discussed is individual responses. And I feel like there's no one, and I completely include myself, no one feels absolutely comfortable with their answer to the question, what am I going to do when someone asks me for money on the street? And I'm just curious if there's anyone, this is a completely optional question, no one has to answer this question, but I wonder if anybody has any insight on sort of how they have come to their personal place of how to treat that. Because I feel like probably everyone in the room, literally everyone in the room, probably struggles with, okay, how do I have a response to this that makes sense? Am I going to give money to everyone I see? Am I going to give money to no one I see? Am I going to, you know, what? Tell me about, and I'm happy to share too, but tell me about just personally, anyone that wants to, sort of how you can help us all figure it out.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a tough question. That's so tough. You know, it just, for me personally, it just depends on how I'm kind of feeling in that moment. And that sounds kind of shallow, and I don't mean it to be that way, but really it's, sometimes you're in a hurry, and sometimes you're not. Sometimes you actually have cash on you, sometimes you don't. Even if here, even being in Sarasota, we've probably been asked 5 or 6 times for money. And Tiff made a really good point to me yesterday. She said, it doesn't matter whether or not the story they're telling you is true or false, whether they are going back to a trailer or a home, or they're actually going to be sleeping out on a park bench that night. That person is in such a desperate place that they are asking for help. But having said that, you know, if you pass somebody by just because, you know, you have that stigma of, well, if you're giving them cash, you could be enabling them for some kind of addiction of some kind, alcohol or drugs or painkillers. And that may be true, that may not be true. I think for the individual, the most important thing is to get involved in a very personal way, whether it means working at a soup kitchen or just going in to help with the intake for a shelter. And all you have to do is get to know that one person and get to know them on a deep level, spend time with them, know what their strengths are, know what their weaknesses are, be very upfront. Do you deal with addiction problems? But it's hard because you want to feel like you want to be the good Samaritan all the time, and it's difficult to do that. But then after becoming involved in that one individual's life, like the relationship that you guys have, I think it's also important to then surround yourself with a group of friends that are going to help to support that person, especially if it's someone who's very young. Because, I think we're all here because we have a strong support system around us, whether that's family and friends, and we can all survive on those relationships. A lot of these people have absolutely nothing, and not just in terms of monetary gain, in terms of relationships. So, it's the African proverb that it takes a village, and I think it really does. We have to surround these people with love and try to provide our best talents to them, whether it's helping them find a job, just social skills, just getting them, connected with various people that can help them and help them rise up from their situation.
I agree with Clay, absolutely. There are so many, if you live in New York, you get confronted with this every day 100 times, right? And so you can't give everyone. And I think it's also, it's where you make this connection maybe in that moment, or where is something, okay, here I have a couple of dollars in my pocket, and then you give. But it's overwhelming, it's where do you start, what do you do? And it's a very hard decision and question, I don't have the answers.
Yeah, and I'm pretty callous about it. I give a little bit when I can, but truthfully, maybe I have nicer clothes on, but very often I'm hardly better off than they are, the homeless people that are asking for money, except, I'm much better off because I'm not mentally ill, I'm not addicted to any drugs, I don't have a criminal record, I'm college educated. But the irony is that, I am so similar in many ways to them in terms of housing and maybe even just lack of money. Like 6 months ago, I was even debating whether I could afford to buy some shoelaces because I didn't want to ask anybody for money, and I was just really broke. But I'm also a volunteer at a very good organization called Women in Need, and I work as their in-house photographer covering their events, and also, as you'll see in the movie, I play Santa Claus for them every year for their kids, and for the women that are in the shelter. And it's kind of ironic because I would like to have this organization maybe help me out a little bit, but they don't know, my story.
You're not a woman in need.
Yeah,
right?
Well, charity. And Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to give the Salvation Army. They think they have very low overhead, and they provide a lot of good services.
As the locals may recall, the city and the county recently hired a national homeless expert. And his number one tenet was do not feed, do not give to panhandle, do not give to panhandlers, because it just enables and it's not moving people closer to programs or health. But on a personal basis, I still make a judgment on a case-by-case basis. I suspect most of our residents do. But the city, and we have a lot of faith people and churches who come and just do feedings on weekends. There's probably one going on by the farmers market this morning. But there are, which represents, I think, this human instinct or desire to want to help, but people don't know what to do. So we're trying to organize in the city to give people some options where they can really help. And we're moving in the direction of housing first to try to provide stable housing for individuals, no matter what their dilemma or their challenge, with casework support. And we are so hopeful that people will make real contributions to that. And if we get it organized correctly, we'll be able to account for the honest investment of those dollars and hopefully be able to show the results a year or two down the road.
That's wonderful. I'll throw my 2 cents in too, since you all were brave enough to share your thoughts too, because I don't think there are any wrong answers here. I think we're all trying to help each other figure out what to do. Personally, I have a rule that I don't give money to anyone on the street. My wife and I give us what I think is a significant portion of our money to charities that are there to help people in need, including homeless people. My wife works full time in affordable housing, and so. But I do think that the one thing that we can all do, and that I will preach for a second, what we all must do, is I try every single person that approaches me on the street, whether they're homeless or not, whatever it is, to make eye contact, to respond to them, and to see them in that moment and be with them in that moment. One of my favorite quotes in the world is Mother Teresa, who said, we can do no great things, we can only do small things with great love. And that 1 second, that 5 seconds that you spend is a small thing that you can do with great love. So with that, I will throw it out to the audience. What is important for y'all to talk about today? I'm just going to walk to the edge of the stage and take your questions. Since we don't have enough mics to have them in the audience, I'll relay them on the microphone so that everybody can understand what they were. And who has a question that they want to start off with? Yes.
My question, thank you so much for doing this. This situation touches me personally because I have been following the story of a young man that I've known for about 20 years who's on the streets here in Sarasota. And I've been away for 8.5 years, and every time I come back, I see him and I help him. So I don't agree with the consultant who said that whatever he said, don't give him food, because I just took some food to him yesterday because I'm thinking, if I were in that situation and hungry, I would want some food, you know? And if, he's, I watch people pass, looking at him strangely and, turning up their noses and all of that because he stinks and he's dirty and all of that. Question. He said, Vicki, help me find some housing. And he said, can I live with you? That broke my heart. Oh, you can't live with me, but I can surely help you find some housing, I think. I'll try anyway. So I'm wondering, Sir Tom, you said that you're working on housing. So what options does he have? Right now he sleeps in the park at Marina Jack and across the street. And he said that he does get a check. Somebody holds a check for him at Social Security office, but I don't think it's enough. Any options?
Tom, what can we tell people that are in this situation?
I know who you're talking about, and I agree with everything you've just said. And I think I'm told he receives about $700 a month, which isn't quite enough for rent. This is one of those individuals that a shelter will not help. So this is somebody we need to raise the money for to put in a case-supported permanent housing unit. Serious mental illness there. amazing the individual can survive. And the average time on the streets for our chronically homeless, we just did a survey, is 4 years. And this gentleman has been on the streets for probably triple or quadruple that. It's 20. It's amazing that he's even been able to survive. But we need to get housing for him and get some case support. And this is a big part of the whole situation that's evolved in America, is over the last 3 or 4 decades, this country, good intentions, I suspect, but we've closed over 400,000 mental health beds. And the community mental health programs that were supposed to succeed and follow onto those closures just hasn't happened as the country has grown in population and the economy has changed. So we need to really get back to funding mental health. And unfortunately, Floridians, our state is 49th out of 50 in terms of funding mental health. So we need everybody to talk about it, think about it, address it, and find places for Michael to live rather quickly. And our campaign to raise money hopefully will begin within the next 30 days.
You mentioned $700 isn't a lot of money. That seems like more than enough to find housing, group housing for someone.
Well, welcome to our world here. We're not quite as expensive as New York when it comes to housing, but affordable housing is a tough challenge here. If probably the cheapest rent we could find for this individual would probably be $500, $550 a month for rent.
Even like a barrack situation? I mean, a youth hostel charges $30 a night, so that's $900, and they're making money off of that. And, you know, it just seems to me bunk beds, and, you know, you could, to me, I'm sure it could be done for like, you know, $15 a night.
Well, that's one of the issues here. There's a gap in the low-income housing portfolio here, a big gap. And I'm sure some of our artists can relate to that as well. But $700 for rent and food and whatever else you do that's a tight budget.
Yeah, but on a group basis, it seems like it's very manageable. I'm not talking about an individual room. I'm talking about a group room, and where there are meals, group meals. It seems like it can be done, but you know, I'm not arguing with you.
I agree.
To me, I'm just find that you know mystifying.
As it stands now, Tom, what's the first step? If someone came up to you on the street and said, "Look, there goes my watch." Said, "Look, I want to get my life together. I don't have a place to sleep tonight. Where's the first place I should go right now to try to start this process?" So that we can share with those people.
There's a 220-bed shelter here, just down the street, and that's the first stop. And they've never really refused any requests from one of our police officers to house somebody there overnight. Awesome. And then during the day, Monday through Friday, there's the Resurrection House on Kumquat and 4th. And there's coffee, and we're beginning to introduce caseworkers into that facility.
Gotcha. Who else? You can either come down or you can just stand up and say your question, and I'll put it on the microphone. Yes.
I don't have a question, but this is unusually bizarre. I'm homeless. And I was sitting over here, I have a big backpack, and I took a break, and somebody came by and gave me the ticket for this showing. So, hi everybody. This is what homeless looks like.
Thank you for coming. Would you like to share a little bit about your story? You don't have to, but if you'd like to, please do.
I've lived in Fort Lauderdale for a long time, for 30 years, and there was a hurricane that went through there called Hurricane Wilma, and I lived in the same place on a golf course for 11 years. I moved over to a really nice duplex that got raised so I could put a parking lot in, and I moved into a trailer court. Well, hurricanes and trailers don't mix. So I think it was October of 2005, but I lost my home, or my place of residence, and I've been bouncing around ever since. And I don't have when something that catastrophic happens to my mind, I don't pull my boots up, my bootstraps and forward. It kind of just crushed me. So I've been here, I've been in Memphis, and I've gotten jobs, but I've always done real well with the jobs, but then I just have these huge gaps of unemployment in my resume, and it's kind of tough to get hired. But if I'm going to tell you all something about myself here, and I'll make it quick, but this is it. I was in Memphis. I had a friend of mine down here who was begging me to move down. So I moved down, and we had a really nice place we were sharing over here in the Serenade. And he has an elderly cousin, so he moves to Tampa to take care of her, and I get left here. Okay, and I had a job that paid very, very minimal. So the first thing I did is I went to the Salvation Army, not knowing that they have a drug and rehab program. And by that point in time, I was thoroughly lost in my life. And so it was as if God just brought me right down here, made me homeless, put me in front of the Salvation Army, and got into their drug and rehab. So it's all a blessing. And you have to keep that out with you. And that man right there helped me.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I pity whoever has to follow that with a question, because that's an amazing story. But who else has a question, comment? Yes.
I'd like to speak about the jail. So many homeless people go to jail.
Yes.
And then they open the jail doors. They have
Yes.
they even went to jail with.
Yes.
I even saw one man that went out of jail barefooted and had to get to the Salvation Army barefooted on a July day. We need to have compassion in our jail system.
Absolutely. This is one of those other interlocking issues, right? I mean, we spend a whole festival doing things about jail and post-jail, because you're absolutely right. Did everybody hear the question? Wanted to talk about how people getting out of jail often have so little opportunity, and she saw someone walking out of jail literally barefoot, had to get to the Salvation Army barefoot. And then, of course, they have the stigma of being ex-cons as well. And absolutely, it's an incredibly important part of the problem. Tom, you want to talk about it?
Well, just some quick math. There's about 1,000 jail cells in Sarasota County. On any given night, 200 are filled with transient or homeless individuals. And when you do the math on that, at probably a very conservative estimate of $75 a day, you're up to $5.5, $6 million over the course of a year for jailing people. So these have become default shelters, default mental health beds. But if we could just cut that in half, that would be $2.5, $3 million of savings that we could plow into housing first and get the Michaels and 100 other Michaels off the streets in short order. So it's a public policy decision that has to be made.
Who else has a question, comment? Yes.
My name is Steve McAllister. I'm a guest blogger for SRQ Backlot and involved in the homeless fight here. And I'm wondering, in the Man in the Maze film, we saw how our food industry and our relationship with food has been very unhealthy. You know, and we see food as something we profit from, and that's it. And we've lost the true meaning of food as healthful, as a sacrament. And in Sarasota, one of our biggest industries is real estate, where we've created imaginary lines in the dirt, and we say this is what property is, and this is where our value is. And we created that into just a commodity again. And at this time when we're looking at people who are not able to play that game and be cast to the side and can't afford that property in real estate and are becoming homeless, do we need to rethink that as a society as to how we're really utilizing the property at our disposal? Where we have 5 empty homes for every 1 homeless individual in this country, how do we rethink that and start getting people where they need to be and finding their value?
That is a big question. And I don't know that we're going to get to the full answer to that question on this stage, but it is certainly a staggering statistic and something to grapple with. Does anybody have any comment?
Well, eventually, there needs to be areas in the region that is a little more open to some zoning changes and things for smaller homes or, creative, kind of innovative housing developments for maybe very low-income people. Yeah. So at some point, that needs to be considered probably. Yeah. And if it could be associated with agricultural or raising food, all the better.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, Gigi, I thought you had a question. And I think we'll probably have time for one more question. Yes. I want to know if there was sort of resistance among the homeless community locally to any of the solutions that were being offered, right? Is that one of the challenges to try to create solutions that are sellable to the population they're trying to serve? Tom, you want to speak?
Well, we just surveyed the homeless community here, and 93% report they do not want to be living on the streets. but 90% have gone to the Salvation Army, but only 60% found the Salvation Army useful. So there's a big group of people, 40%, who do not, cannot get along in the shelter, are not helped by the shelter. It's too confining for them. They have issues with the shelter. So we need obviously more options in the portfolio right now. But sheltering is not for everybody. I think the film last night showed some of the difficulty that it is being in a shelter and living in a shelter. And so it obviously doesn't appeal to everybody. And we've got a core group out there that just can't deal with shelters, a pretty significant group.
Well, this is not the beginning of this conversation. It's a conversation that under your leadership has been already started. This is not going to be the end of this conversation. We want to be a part of promoting the conversation and moving the conversation forward. So we encourage you to mull over these things that we've talked about and to keep talking about them amongst yourselves and with your friends and keep telling us as a festival how we can bring these issues to light. One of the things we're doing is, as I said last night, we're having a whole series of films on homelessness during the festival. And why don't the two of you say when if you know them off the top of your heads, when your show times are in case these fine people want to come and see each of your movies. Do you remember when your show times are?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Ours is Homeless on Tuesday the 14th at 8:15 and Wednesday the 15th at 5:15. And we will be here for the 14th and be doing a Q&A after.
Okay. And our lead actor will be here as well. So.
Ours is today at 5:30 and on Monday at 4:30, I think, and we'll also be there for the Q&A.
And it's called Homeless, but the Om is like the French word for man, so it's got 2 M's in it, whereas yours has 1 M, so H-O-M-M-E less.
All right. So everybody, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. Thank you to our panelists. We'll see you very soon. Come on out to the Orrin Moverman conversation right now in FST if you're interested. Be talking more about these issues.